To say hello to everybody and thank you for joining us tonight for our webinar series, Residency Real Talk with Dr. Samir Desai. For those who may not know me yet, I'm sure I've talked to you in some way, shape, or form, but if we haven't met face-to-face, my name is Alyssa Harlow, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at MD2B Connect. We're very excited to have you guys here tonight, and we have a special guest joining us, and it's Dr. Rajni Kata. So thanks for joining us, Dr. Kata. We look forward to answering your guys' questions that you've submitted using our Google form. If any questions come to mind during the webinar, we encourage you and welcome you to share those in the chat, and we'll do our best to save some time at the end to answer those questions. Lastly, I just wanted to acknowledge that, we understand that this can be a really stressful time for those who are applying to this match cycle. And if you guys have any questions, concerns, please feel free to reach out to anybody from our team. You guys are part of our MD2B Connect family, and we really care about your success and just your well-being overall as well. So please feel free and do not hesitate to reach out to any one of us. We really want to help you with any questions that you have, and whatever it may be, please feel free to reach out. Lastly, throughout the webinar, we'll be sharing a variety of links and resources inside of the chat. So please feel free to save those and use them. They may be useful for you later on. Obviously, as we go through the interview process, some of you may be interviewing later on in the year. So save those for later use. And with that said, we hope that you guys enjoy the webinar tonight. And with that, I will go ahead and pass the torch over to Dr. Desai.
Thank you so much, Alyssa, and a hearty welcome to all of our rotators. Thank you so much for joining us today. And Alyssa, I'm so glad that you brought up just, taking care of yourself, because this whole process, as you know, is very, very stressful. And I know I've been talking to a number of you over the last few weeks, and there's been a lot going on with getting your residency applications together, on top of people studying for their exams, and the list goes on and on. So I know how hard you all have been working, and I can tell you that work ethic that you've had has really impressed me in so many different ways. And now we're moving into a different phase of the process. We're moving into the interview phase. So everything you've been doing has been to get these interviews, and we need to also now start to talk about how to shine in your interviews. And so we wanted to devote most of this webinar to that topic. And just a bit of background, I know most of you know me pretty well. I know we have a few new rotators that I haven't yet had a chance to speak with, and so I welcome all of you. But with respect to interviewing, I have a lot of experience interviewing. First of all, I never forget what it was like to be in your position. So I once was an interviewee myself, and I remember how stressful and anxiety-provoking that was. And now I have sit on the other side of the desk. So I interview applicants for our residency program. I've been doing that, for a long, long time. And that's given me a lot of insight into what programs and selection committee members and individual interviewers are looking for. And so, I'm very excited to be able to offer you my experience in that area. In a minute, you're going to hear from Dr. Kata, but she also has a tremendous amount of experience interviewing applicants as well. And so I'm going to hand it over to you, Rajni.
Okay, well, I'm really pleased to be here this evening, and I am I'm really pleased that our attendees, that you all are taking the time to really think about interview preparation. And this is such an important step. Everything, as Samir said, that everything you've been doing has been working up to this point to try to get these interviews. And now you have a chance to really shine and present yourself and your skills and your strengths and your qualities to the admissions committee. And so it's really worthwhile to spend the time to prepare for these interviews. When I actually still remember myself interviewing as well. I was interviewing for dermatology, and I remember I had to take out an extra student loan in order to be able to travel all across the country. I had 14 interviews all across the country. And I remember in hindsight, there were a few interviews I did not do as well as I could have. But the interview that counted, I did do well, and I matched to Northwestern University, where I did my residency in dermatology. And after that, I was a professor of dermatology at the Baylor College of Medicine for over 17 years. And during that time, we would interview, I mean, typically every season we would interview about 40 students, and there were hundreds of applications that we would review to get down to those 40 students to be able to pick 3 or 4. And so I had the privilege of interviewing some of the top medical students in the country. But it was really interesting to me how some of the top students in the country did not stand out in their interviews. And after a long day of speaking to maybe, 15 people in a row, sometimes I found that some students sort of, you didn't want this as an interviewer, but sometimes they sort of started to blend together. I would ask a question like, why should we take you? And almost everybody said something very similar. And so I realized how important it was to really be able to present yourself in such a way that the interviewer can see you as a individual candidate who is uniquely suited to be at that program. So that's one of the things we talk a lot about, is really emphasizing fit with that particular residency program. So I know we have a lot of questions that have come in, and I'll share some more of my thoughts as we address some of those questions.
Okay, so I'm going to get us started with the questions that we had from the Google form. So the first question is actually about letters of interest. And the question is, when is the best time to send a letter of interest, and who should it be addressed to?
Okay, great question. This is a question I know that's really on the minds of a lot of applicants, especially this time of the year. So we define a letter of interest as a communication that is sent from an applicant to a program, where in that communication you are expressing an interest in that particular residency program. And that is something that we know over the years can work, can get you noticed, and can make a program director take a closer look at your application and hopefully then take action, which is to invite you for an interview. As to when is the right time to send it, that really depends on your specialty that you're applying to, and it depends on the programs within that specialty that you're applying to. So some specialties, for example, have released certain dates on which interview offers will be extended. And so the programs in those specialties will generally abide by those rules, and then you will know in advance when those dates are. So with that knowledge in mind, you can plan accordingly to send your letters of interest. Other specialties don't have uniform release dates. Their programs will release interview offers at varying intervals. We've seen programs extend interview offers as early as the first day that they can download applications. That's not a terribly common practice. It's a rare program that does that. But the biggest months for interview offers are in October and November. So what I generally tell people with respect to letters of interest is you want those letters to reach the program before they make those interview offers. So when they're in their decision-making phase. And so again, to some extent, that's program dependent. And there is some language on program websites that will give you some clues or some very, very direct verbiage that says exactly when those interview offers will be extended. So if you go to a program and it says, our interview offers will start to be extended in mid-October, then you know that a letter of interest needs to be sent before that happens. Keep in mind that a lot of programs do extend interview offers in batches. So, one batch will go out at a certain point in time, and then another batch will go out, say maybe a week or 10 days later. So there's a lot of variability with how these programs operate. But the other thing to keep in mind is you don't want to send a letter of interest if the program specifically states that they are not welcoming of those letters. And there are some programs that do specifically indicate that. So before you hit that send button, do return to their website to see if that's a policy. Rajani, anything to add to that?
No, I think that's about all I would include.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and move on to our next question, which is about interview scheduling. So we had a lot of questions about interview scheduling. The first question that we had was, how do we handle checking our devices or notifications if we'll be on a rotation during the interview season?
Okay, yeah, that's another great question. So one of the things that happens in the fall after people submit their applications is that they continue to do rotations. Not everybody will do rotations, but some people will continue to do rotations. And if you are in a rotation or other type of activity where you may not have full freedom to check your email, that presents a problem because you can receive a notification in the middle of a very, very busy day saying you've received an interview offer. And you would think that if you waited until the end of the interview day, that you could then reply to that offer and everything would be okay. Unfortunately, there have been instances where programs invite more applicants than they have interview spots. And so when that happens, that can mean that if the people who respond quickly, if enough of them respond to those interview offers, that those spots could get filled up before you get to your notification later in the day. So this causes a lot of pressure on applicants to always be checking their devices. Otherwise, they might miss out. Now, one of the things that we're trying to do all across the board in different specialties is trying to change that practice. So I'm a member of the Alliance for Academic Internal Medicine, which releases policy statements about interview practices, best practices for programs. And what we do as part of that organization is try to create guidelines that would be fair and equitable for people. Doesn't matter if you're USMD, USDO, or IMG, to recognize that everybody is doing different things and to not be in the situation where you lose out on an important interview because you're rotating. And so as an organization, we have encouraged programs in internal medicine not to extend more interview offers than you have spots available. We're also encouraging programs not to, put people on wait lists if they take 3 or 4 or 5 hours to respond to an email. So we're trying to encourage programs to give several days for an applicant to respond to that interview offer before moving on to somebody else. Now, even though we are doing that, and even though there is some evidence that more programs are adhering to these recommendations, there are programs from what we saw last year that were not operating with those best practices in mind. And so if you're in the middle of a rotation, that's going to be the anxiety that you're going to face, right? How do I stay tethered to my device and respond to this interview offer without compromising the things that I'm doing in the rotation? Because if you're in a rotation, your highest priority is to your patients, but you're also trying to make a great impression on the people that you're working with. So one of the things that you can do if you're in this situation is have somebody else who can respond to those emails. So somebody else is actually checking your emails for these types of notifications, and you basically give them the permission to check and to sometimes respond on your behalf. And that is something that people have done. In other cases, depending upon what you're doing during the day. So if you're in formal teaching rounds and you're with the attending for 2 to 3 hours and you're doing patient care related activities, it may not be easy for you to move over to your phone and take a look at that. But a bulk of the day in a typical rotation has some periods of downtime where you can take a quick look at your phone. It may be that it takes you half an hour, or maybe even 2 hours to get there. But in most cases, that won't be too long of a time that you would suffer from that. So some strategy is going to be involved. Okay. Sometimes the residents or interns, if you're doing a academic rotation, they've been in your shoes before. So during the day, if they know that, hey, I'm checking my phone, not because I'm not interested in what's going on in this rotation, it's because I'm in interview season, they were usually very, very understanding. So sometimes some transparency on your part with the people you work with can also be very helpful. Rajani, any other thoughts on that?
No.
Okay.
So for our next question, also about interview scheduling, they're asking, is there an advantage to taking an interview date sooner or later if we're offered the choice?
Yeah, so fortunately, we have a lot of studies that have looked at different specialties in regards to the timing of your interviews and whether that has any bearing on the success, your success in the match. And what we know from those studies is that when you do your interview, doesn't have bearing on the results. Now, what I generally tell people is the interview is the most important factor in the residency selection process. So with that in mind, it takes quite a bit of time to become an effective interviewee. There's a lot of work that has to go into it. And so you need time to get to that point. And so for that reason, I'm not a big fan of doing interviews early in the season, say in early to mid-October. I prefer to schedule interviews later in the season, November, December, January, because that gives you the advantage of the time to get yourself to where you need to be. As Dr. Kata was saying, you know, how do you deliver these compelling answers? That requires effort, strategy, repeated practice, feedback. It's not something that happens overnight, despite what you might hear from other people who might say, oh, you only need a few days. Really, if you want to be a strong interviewee, you need time. And so doing your interviews a bit later in the season gives you that advantage of using that time wisely.
Okay. Do you have anything to add to that, Dr. Kata?
No.
Okay. So for our next question, I think this is a pretty good question because this can definitely be like an awkward situation. The question is, what is the etiquette if we're offered interviews on the same dates?
Yeah, so that is a challenging situation, but I will tell you that it's highly unlikely that you're going to get an interview offer that comes from two programs simultaneously that only offer you the same date. So obviously one program is going to notify you first, and then we want you to accept that offer. You don't want to sit on that for the reasons that I described before. And then if another program comes right behind that program and gives you an offer for the same date, then you have a decision to make as far as how to handle it. Now, what I will tell you is that usually programs will offer multiple interview dates. So it's not terribly common for them to just say, hey, we invite you for this day alone. Usually they're going to give you multiple dates, or they're going to send you to an interview scheduling system where there are multiple dates and you'll be able to select the date that is right for you. But let's just assume that this is the situation you're in. You've accepted an interview date in another program, and now another program has offered you the same date, and you have no other options that they have presented you. In that situation, I would simply reach out to the program and let them know that that you're extremely appreciative of this interview offer. You're excited to have this opportunity to interview with them, but unfortunately, you have committed to interview at another program on that same date. And could you please have some additional dates to consider for an interview? Alyssa, what's the next question?
Yeah, so the next question is asking basically about how you should interview or schedule your interviews. So I think what they mean, and I'll read the question first, is how should we schedule interviews, make many programs clustered together, or extend it in the long time period? And I believe what they mean is, should they do the interviews clustered together if they get multiple, or should they spread them out? So I don't know, maybe you have a different interpretation of it, but that's kind of what I think.
Rajani, getting back to what you were saying about your when you were an interviewee and you had 14 interviews. Obviously, when you interviewed and when I interviewed, we were traveling across the country to interview, and that obviously added to the complexity of the process. But I remember when I interviewed, and I didn't do 14 interviews, I did a little bit less than you, but I remember getting a bit tired towards the end of my interview season. Is that what you experienced as well?
Yeah, I have to agree. It's exhausting. And it was exhausting for us because we had the additional time spent in airplanes and in rental cars and in hotels. But even I find it's exhausting sitting in a chair for 4 hours looking at a screen. And I think if you're going to do that back to back to back, you really have to factor that in. One issue that I found was that by the end of interview season, certainly by the end of the day, my cheeks would hurt from smiling so much. But also sometimes I did feel as though my answers sounded a little practiced and rehearsed. And one of the keys when you're interviewing is you really want to come to every single interview with a fresh, very energetic approach, because the kind of energy that you give off, they've done studies where they've surveyed program directors, and a lot of program directors find that energy and the enthusiasm is something that is very valuable to a program. And so if you are coming into an interview without being able to display that level of enthusiasm, then that's definitely a concern. So I think from that standpoint, there is a case to be made for spreading the interviews out. I think if you have no other choice and you have to sort of bunch them together, that's certainly fine. You just have to factor that in, that you're going to have to really work hard to keep your enthusiasm levels up.
Yeah, I remember when we had grand rounds at Baylor, where I'm faculty. We had one of the associate deans who came to visit us to give that grand rounds from Florida. And, in talking with that associate dean, in his specialty, one of the things that, they had seen was, a very common reason for a poor interview score is a low energy level. And that's just goes to what Rajni, you were saying, is that in these interviews, you want to show enthusiasm for that specialty, enthusiasm for that program, in the way that you speak, in the words that you use, in your body language. And interview fatigue, it can be something very real. So if you're doing a lot of interviews back to back to back, it can affect your energy level, and that can affect the interview rating that you receive. In addition, you need some time from one interview to another to prepare for the next interview. You need obviously to optimize some of your answers for that next program. So there's research that you're going to have to do, which can take quite a bit of time, not just for your interview answers, but just so you have knowledge about the program and you can make the most of your interview day from material that they present to you. Because you are very concerned about making a great interview performance and being ranked high, they're also trying to tell you about their program, and you're trying to figure out whether you want to train there. So there's a lot of different things that need to be accomplished on interview day, and having a bit more time between interviews allows you to get those things done.
And I'll add as well, one of the things I have heard, like online comments, is that, just go into an interview, just be yourself and you'll be fine. They're just looking for somebody who's knowledgeable, who'd be nice to work with. And I think that's very poor advice, because when we talk about, and this is a question that's coming up, how do you research a residency program? Specific instructions for how to research a residency program, because even a question such as, and I'll give you a few examples, tell me about yourself. What questions do you have for me? Why should we take you? These are all questions that should be modified slightly based on where you are interviewing. So a lot of people don't realize that. Their tell me about yourself is practiced, rehearsed, and it's the same exact response for every single, for all 8 interviews. when in actuality, you might want to tweak it a little bit based on what you have learned about that individual program. And so, just going in, be yourself, practice a little bit. We go the other way. You really want to be able to spend significant time researching the residency program to be able to formulate your responses strongly. So I'll really agree with you on that, Samir, that you have to have time in between, ideally, if you can, to be able to refresh your memory on this next program and how you want to modify your responses based on that program.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you went into more detail related to that, Rajani. This is something that a lot of interviewees don't appreciate. It's something that I didn't appreciate when I was interviewing for residency. All of you have done so many wonderful things in different areas, right? You've obviously done rotations here in the US. You've made a mark through community service. You've done some excellent research. You may have advocated for certain things in medicine in very, very special ways. I'm sure you've realized as you've been researching these programs that programs have different strengths. Some programs, community service and outreach, that's a big part of their training program. And other programs, they really want to develop the next generation of clinician educators. And so with all of you having a lot of diverse interests and strengths, there's an opportunity here in each interview to highlight some different things. So thinking about what your strategy is going to be as you go into each interview and whether you need to tweak a few things, like tell me about yourself, or, what questions do you have for our program? There's going to be some adjusting that you may want to do and may very well be in your best interest. And having the time to do that allows you to accomplish that goal. Remember also that some programs will indicate what they're looking for on their website. They will be very, very clear that the qualities we're looking for are A, B, and C, or we're looking for evidence of X, Y, and Z. And that's where you need to think about how to get some of that into some of your interview answers. So all of that takes, as Dr. Kata was saying, effort and time, right? And so that's why not clustering too many interviews in this very short period of time is good.
But I think that's a perfect segue into our next question, because our next question is actually about researching programs before interviews. So our next question is, if I happen to miss the virtual open house, what would be your suggestion on how to respond to the question, what piques your interest in our program? And that's saying that let's say they only have limited information from the program's website.
Okay, so this is one of the keys to really standing out in your residency interview. And again, if I'm thinking about 15 superstar applicants in a row, it can be hard to remember specific things about that. But if I had an applicant that came in and was talking about a specific program that we offer that really piqued their interest because they themselves had this strong interest in becoming a clinician educator, and they loved that our program had this particular track, now all of a sudden, that's something that I'm going to remember very distinctly. Oh, this was the person that really had this strong interest in this aspect of our program. So if you think about how to find out that information about a residency program, absolutely, you need to start with the website. And when I say start with the website, you do want to start with the homepage of the website and learn something about the residency program, but you really need to go a lot deeper than that. And by the way, this is research that needs to be done in the weeks before your interview. So you really want to be prepared ahead of time. And I have a worksheet about the AEIOU approach to researching a program. And Alyssa, I'll get that to you. So for this worksheet on how to research a residency program, I actually have my students fill out this worksheet for every single residency program that they're going to. And AEIOU stands for AIMS. So what is the mission or the aim of the program? So some programs will state that they are committed to serving an underserved population. Others are committed to enhancing population health. Others are committed to advancing translational research. Others are committed to developing the next generation of clinician educators. So often you will be able to find this information stated on the website, but I'll go into that a little bit more if it's not apparent on the website. E stands for excellence. So what are the areas of excellence in the program? And usually that's pretty easy to find, because if there is an area of excellence that the program is known for, they really try to discuss that. They try to make that known. And then I stands for initiatives. So what is the program working on, or what is it working towards? So for example, are they developing a new center of excellence? Are they going to be developing a new robotic surgery program? Are they bringing in a new technique? And then AEIO stands for opportunities. So what are some of the opportunities that are present at this program that you're not going to find elsewhere? So that might be the chance to work with a refugee population. It might be the chance to work on, with one of the areas of excellence of neurofibromatosis in the country. Oftentimes programs have unique specific opportunities that you can find at that program that you are not going to find at every single program. So you're looking for those unique opportunities. And then finally, U is also, for you, I'm talking about unique. And you're trying to determine what makes this program different. So sometimes they have a unique curriculum. They have specific types of teaching methods. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about AEIOU. Essentially, you're looking for what this program has as its stated goals and what makes it unique. And the most important thing is, how does this fit with your own strengths and goals and missions and values? So you're really looking for those areas of congruence. Now, you're going to start with the website. And one of the areas of the website, and you might just start with the homepage, but then you need to really dig deeper. So you can start by looking at the specific faculty. So almost every residency program is going to have a website that lists their faculty, and you can click on that and try to learn more about their bios. If there's nothing at all about their bios on their website, you can, as long as you have the name, start to go into PubMed and see what publications that they've worked on. I'd also recommend really looking at that news tab on the program's website. So some of the programs will talk about, this is what we're in the news for, or they might have press releases. And so you can Google press releases or news about the specific residency program. And the reason I talk about press releases is typically a program will put out a press release if there's something that they are proud of. So perhaps an award that they received, or an initiative that they're working towards, or a grant that they received. So you want to try to find out what they're in the news for. And I already mentioned looking up faculty bios and looking up faculty research, because their areas of research can also be very helpful. Now, if you're still not finding much on the website, or not as much as you would like, or certainly even if you have found a lot, it's also very helpful to try to find a way to talk to a resident at that program, because pulling in that information, that real insider look into that program, can be very helpful when you bring that up in an interview. I was talking to one of your residents, Susan Smith, and one of the things that she spoke to me about was your simulation lab. And I was really drawn to that because I know how important blah, blah, blah is. And so if you can talk to a current resident, and this might be, seeing if you have that first, second, or third degree connection to try to make a connection with somebody at that program. That's not always going to be possible. And you may also then rely on the program's reputation. So you might say, my faculty mentor, Dr. Garza, spoke so highly of your residency program. She knows a lot of graduates of your program, and she mentioned that your program is really well known for, this facet and this facet. And that really speaks to me because I myself, one of my major goals is to do XYZ. So you can start to see how you can research a program from multiple different angles, even if there's not easily apparent information on the website. But it's really very worthwhile to dig deep into that program. As I mentioned, one of the residency interview questions that I see a lot of people under prepare for is, what questions do you have for me? That's one of those questions that a lot of people do not spend enough time really thinking about and preparing for. And they might just ask the same question at every program. Do you anticipate any changes in your program over the next few years? What would you say is the greatest strength of your program? So you can see how you could ask that question at every single program. And I got asked those questions a lot. And it's really a missed opportunity because you don't stand out in any way. Now, contrast that with, I was reading about your community outreach health clinic in which you offer services at a reduced rate to this underserved community, this underserved patient population in your community. And that's something that I am very interested in because of my own work in my home country, where I helped develop our outreach program at XYZ Hospital. Can you tell me a little bit more about how residents are involved in that community outreach program? So now you can see that that is a question that is very specific to that program. And it also very strongly highlights your own fit with that program's mission. So that's one of the ways that you can incorporate your research. And there's certainly other ways to incorporate your research. So that was a very long answer to that question. Samir, do you have additional information that you want to add there?
That was great, Rajani. The other thing that I would say is more and more programs are making information available, not just in the written word, but if you go to their websites, you can click on their videos where they give you more information than what we had when we interviewed, and even before the pandemic. So things have changed. Obviously, not all programs have a lot of information. Some websites are very sparsely populated. But what I would say to you, that if you miss a virtual open house, many programs have a virtual event oftentimes before the actual interview day, where people who are invited for the interview have like a virtual meet and greet the evening before, or sometimes even the evening after the interview. So if there is a reason why you can't attend a virtual meet and greet, for example, you can always contact the program and see if you could be scheduled to attend another meet and greet. So that's something to keep in mind. I know that's the virtual meet and greets before the interview. Those are things that are really restricted to the people who are invited for interviews. But if that's something that's being offered and you haven't had a chance to attend a virtual open hall, which are generally open to all applicants, that may be another way for you to get some vital information before your interview day.
Okay, I think that was a really thorough response. So that was a very good answer, guys. So our next bout of questions are about questions during the interview. So our next question says, my published papers are from different specialties, IM, peds, and surgery. How do I answer questions about that? And do I mention what kind of fellowship I'm aiming for if they ask about my future?
Yeah, so if you have papers that have been published in different specialties, there may be any one of a number of reasons that happened in that manner. It may be that an applicant wasn't sure of their specialty choice and perhaps did research early in medical school in a particular discipline that didn't end up being their chosen specialty 3 years later. Sometimes people find out their specialty choice later, right, in medical school. So I think a lot of programs are very, very understanding of that. But all research, regardless of what specialty you've done it in, has benefits to your future work, your future research, right? You're building a foundation through the different projects you've been involved with. And a lot of the skills that you're picking up in, let's say, research and surgery, are transferable to research in internal medicine if you have decided internal medicine is the specialty you're going after. So that's one thing you want to keep in mind. Another thing that programs will understand is that opportunities to get involved in research are not the same everywhere. Even in US med schools, they're not the same from one med school to another. Certainly in international med schools, some schools have far more resources in terms of research opportunities than others. And so someone may be in a situation where they want to do research in this particular specialty, and it's simply not available to them in their backyard, and they have to take, the opportunity in some other specialty. Another thing to consider if you've done research in multiple specialties is how that research is related to another. There's obviously some topics that people can study that overlap between different specialties. For example, oncology research, that obviously is highly relevant to internal medicine, but obviously it's relevant to other specialties like surgery and radiation oncology and so on and so forth. So these are some of the things to talk about. Now, if there is some of you may be concerned that the fact that you've done a lot of research in one specialty, could that be interpreted that your true interests are in the other specialty? And what you need to do when you're framing your interview answers is to explain, why you did research in that area and how that's going to benefit you in your chosen career.
Okay. Dr. Kate, anything to add to that?
No.
Okay. So moving on to our next question. As an IMG, how should we answer properly to questions about red flags? So, for example, year of graduation, step scores, exam attempts, etc.
Yeah, that's a great question. I know that this is something, Rajani, we get asked a lot. Doesn't matter if you're USMD, USDO, or IMG applicant. Sometimes our road to residency, we hit some potholes, right? Something doesn't happen as we had hoped it to happen, and that might have led to a low step score or even an attempt on a step exam. And for some of us, we come to the decision of arriving here in the U.S. Later in our careers, and so our YOGs may be further back. So the first step in dealing with this is to recognize that there is an area of concern. That's the first step. And then thinking about how to present that. Now, in presenting it, what you're trying to do is you're trying to explain what it is that has happened, so in a way that a program can easily understand it. And then you're also trying in that explanation to show them that there is some learning that you have taken from all of that, some lessons that you have received from whatever those experiences are, and that has shaped you into someone who has a lot to offer. And in other words, you're trying to show how whatever you've gained from that makes you an effective resident. So if, for example, you're concerned about your year of graduation, one of the things that you'll want to be thinking about is, why is the program concerned about my year of graduation? Well, depending upon your specific situation, they could be concerned because maybe you've been relatively inactive clinically because the bulk of your time after your medical school graduation has been spent in research. Well, if that's the case, then you're going to frame your answer in such a way that you bring forth some information from your research years that show that the skills and qualities you've developed are transferable to the clinical work you'll be expected to do as a resident. So you can start with that, combine that with your actual US clinical experience to actually show them the proof that you've been able to apply those skills and qualities in the clinical arena, and that you've been able to be a productive team member and do the type of work that you're going to be expected to do as a resident. So you'll have to come up with material like this that is going to reassure them. So if it's an issue related to a STEP exam, the STEP exam performance may have been for any one of a number of reasons, right? I've met applicants who've been ill right before they take an exam, applicants who've had a major family health issue. All kinds of things have happened, and programs can be very understanding of that if they have the knowledge of what it is you experience. So putting that together and practicing it again and again so you're comfortable. It's not a comfortable thing to be talking about, but the practice is really required to make you present it and deliver it in a more fluid manner. Reggie, any other thoughts on that?
I would just add that I think this is one where it is important to get feedback on your response, and not just feedback from your friend or your mom, but feedback from a faculty member or a faculty mentor, somebody who has some experience with interviewing, where they can give you some feedback on the strength of your response. Because when it comes to these sort of red flag situations, you never want to come across as defensive. You want to come across as a very mature individual who experienced this speed bump, but has been able to learn and grow from it. And this is why it is not going to impact your residency performance in any way. And that can be a challenging response to come up with. So I think it's good to get feedback on that.
And I know I've talked with some of you about some of these concerns, but you should all know that you can always reach out to me, and we can specifically talk about your situation if that's something that really you're having a hard time figuring out what to do.
Okay. So our next questions are about the interview season and things that you can do besides just preparing for your interviews. So the first question we had in that category was, what would be the best use of our time during interview season if we've already graduated?
Okay, so if you've graduated and you are applying for this cycle and hoping, to get lots and lots of interviews, you have a number of things that you can do and should do to get yourself in the right position. So first of all, interview prep is a big part of what you're going to be doing now. As we've been talking about, it takes a lot of time to become a strong interviewee. So a chunk of your time is going to be devoted to preparing for interviews. Another thing you can do at this point in time is you can, as we talked about before, you can send letters of interest, which can be effective in getting you noticed by some of these programs that you have applied to. A third thing you can do is continue your efforts to network. Remember that networking can still pay off even after you apply. So the people that are in your current network, they can advocate for you. There are people that you may have yet to meet that you might be able to meet over the next 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks that help you get noticed by a program. So networking is another good use of time. I would say that it's also good to keep up other things that you've been doing. So if you've been doing some sort of research project and you weren't able to get it past the finish line before you submitted your application, there may be things that you can do there that get that to publication or presentation. And then that gives you a reason to possibly update programs with something new in your background that may be something that they respond to very positively. Take a closer look at your application if they've been kind of holding off on making a decision. So it gives you things that you do, you can use that in the form of an update to programs. Some of you may be doing rotations. There's a lot of benefits from doing rotations even after you apply. People who have done rotations October, November, December have landed interviews either at that program or hospital if they happen to be doing something at one of those institutions, or have been able to do some networking in that city with other programs, and that's netted them interviews. But one of the things that does come up quite a bit in interviews is, what have you been doing since you've applied? So you like to be able to, to offer some things so that you can, fill in that gap, right? Where what they're wondering, what have you been doing for the last 2-3 months? Reggie, anything to add related to that?
Oh, I would just second what you said, that it is very helpful to be able to address that question on what have you been doing or how have you been spending your time, whether that's in your clinical education, research, your community service, your advocacy work. It is very helpful to be able to have something concrete in that respect. And I also will second what you said about additional opportunities for networking even after your applications have gone in. And it's not always at that program, but sometimes if you're able to develop a relationship with your attending, we've seen people make calls on students' behalf sometimes to be able to try to help them find additional interviews. So.
Right. So moving on to our next question, they're asking, how can we maximize conference presentations and attendance during interview season? And should we bring our printed CVs?
So I'm not entirely sure what that means by maximizing conference. Was it attendance or presentations?
So the question specifically says conference presentations and the attendance during interview season.
So I'm just going to take a bit of a guess at what the intent might be behind the question. But if you're doing a rotation and you have conferences as part of your rotation, maybe there's a resident conferences or hospital conferences, you should make every effort to get to those, because there's a lot of, obviously, some learning associated with it. But beyond that, you may have an opportunity to be in front of faculty who often attend those conferences as well. And so your ability to be seen, by the program director or associate program director may be very, very helpful for you to advance your case at that particular program. If you have opportunities to present at a conference, you should seize those opportunities, because again, that can help you at that particular program. But let's say you're invited to do some grand rounds presentation as part of a team. That also can be used as an update to other programs, because the grand rounds conference at institutions is generally the most prestigious conference that they hold. If the presentations that this questioner was asking about has to do with scientific conferences, then absolutely, you want to go and present. Hopefully it doesn't conflict with any of your interview dates, because again, as we said earlier, that you can use that information to update programs, or when you go to interviews, you can talk about, how you've presented at this conference or that conference. Reggie, anything to add? Okay. Alyssa, next.
Yeah, so I think our next question we might have already answered, but maybe if you had something to add to that. So the next question is, besides interview prep, what are the other useful activities we can do until match day?
So we did answer that in a moment ago. I forgot to answer the other part of this last question, which is, do we need to bring a printed CV? So I think that was a question, right, Alyssa, on the last one?
That's correct. Good catch on that.
Okay. So with the majority of interviews being virtual this year, you won't be bringing a CV anywhere. Now, there are a few programs that are doing in-person interviews or hybrid interviews where they're offering an option of in-person or virtual. And if you're going to go there in person, I would bring a copy of your printed CV with you. If you are interviewing virtually, unless the program has asked you for a printed CV, it's not necessary to, quote unquote, bring your CV with you. I mean, I think that it could be something that some programs ask for us, especially in light of the fact that our ARAS application changed this year, where previously we had the ability to put in as many experiences as we wanted to, but now this year, as you all know, it's limited to 10 experiences. And so there may be some programs that want to see your printed CV because maybe it gives them a better idea of your timeline. What have you been doing since graduation? And maybe that's not as easy for them to tell from your current ARAS application. So that is a possibility. But I will tell you that last year, there weren't too many programs that were asking for printed CVs if you were interviewing with them virtually.
And I think the question may also have been referring back to the conferences. So it doesn't hurt to bring your printed CV with you when you're attending a conference in case you meet an attending and they ask for your CV. So I think it's a great idea to bring it with you to a conference.
Okay. What's next, Alyssa?
Yeah, so the next was kind of a repeat question. It was just asking if, besides interview prep, what other useful activities they can do until match day. So slightly different, just asking what they can do up until match day rather than just an interview season.
I mean, there's a lot of different things that you could potentially do. I think it's really dependent upon your background. I know that some applicants, perhaps because of the medical school that they went to, they're concerned that they weren't able to really get involved in research, for example. So just using that as an example, maybe you haven't done a lot of research. Maybe you've done no research. You might decide that here in these months of October, November, in addition to preparing for your interviews and networking and sending letters of interest, maybe you're going to take a formal research course offered by Johns Hopkins University. And maybe that's going to help you get a bit more grounded in research. And so that might help you at the time of interview. If somebody asks, oh, tell me about your research, you'd be able to offer, something along those lines. So I think it really just depends on your situation, because there's many, many things that can be done. And I think thinking about what would help you and what your interests are in are the driving factors.
And I'll add to that sometimes it can be very difficult to find opportunities to participate in research. That's really been an issue for a lot of our students is I want to be involved in research and I just can't find any opportunities. So in that case, what Dr. Desai was saying is an option where if you can't be involved in research, you can certainly get a grounding in research techniques. So there are a lot of online, Coursera, certainly you can just start with some free online courses to help, for example, even to learn about statistical methods in research projects. That's something that would be very interesting for an interviewer to hear, that you were trying to get a background in certain techniques. I know some of my students have taken the CDC Health Literacy course, which is available for free online, and they've been able to get a certificate from that. And they've used that in their work with me, where we make a lot of patient handouts for patients with allergic contact dermatitis, which is my area within dermatology. And so I like them to have a grounding in health literacy. And so they've taken that course from the CDC and gotten a certificate. So certainly, even if you can't find opportunities to participate in research, I think these sort of opportunities where you're grounding yourself in techniques can be something to speak about during an interview, and certainly can be really an excellent educational opportunity for you. So Alyssa, do we have another question?
Yes, we do. So our next question is asking, if we have a virtual interview and are not offered an in-person visit or second look, should we inquire if it's possible?
Yeah, so you can inquire if it's possible, as long as you take a look at their website and see if there's any language related to in-person visits or second looks. So for example, again, earlier in this webinar, I talked about my involvement in the Alliance for Academic Internal Medicine and how we're trying to disseminate best practices in interviewing with programs to make this a more fair, equitable process. So we're also trying to spread best practices in post-interview communication. So after you have an interview, what should be the communication that follows. So second looks are a form of post-interview communication. And there are some programs, I'll just use internal medicine as an example, that are open to having applicants come for a second look. So with our organization, we're not opposed to having programs offer second look, so long as they have a system in place where your participation in a second look, first of all, you're not penalized for it if you can't do a second look. But second, if you do come for a second look, all the ranking decisions would have already been made, so that your time at that institution during the second look is really for you to get a better feel for the program, its culture, its people, its educational climate. So that is something that is, actively involved. So get back to the question, can you ask for that? It really depends on what's on their website. You'll see that language on some of their websites. If that's not there and you haven't found it any other way, then there's nothing wrong with asking them that.
Okay. Dr. Kata, anything to add to that? All right. So our next question is about LORs. And the first question is, what would happen if one of your LORs is submitted a day after applying?
Okay, yes. So I know that there's a lot of concerns right now about LORs and the delay that sometimes occurs with ECFMG processing of LORs once LORs are uploaded. And sometimes they're not available at the time we submit our application. So if your letter is going to be available one day after you apply, the program is going to receive notification that there's a new document that has been released. And a lot of programs will take action on that and will add that, to your file, and it will be part of the information that's used in their decision to, offer you interview. Some programs may not. So I usually tell applicants to follow up with these programs by just sending them an email. That essentially you're writing to them to let them know that this new piece of your application is now available, and that will prompt them to take some action on it.
Okay. And our next question is a little more complicated. So this person is saying that they've asked an attending or a preceptor for an LOR at the end of their rotation, and the preceptor answered that they'd rather send them a fresh LOR at the start of residency year next year. So basically, this person is planning to apply next year, and the preceptor wants to give them a letter later on in the year next year. So would it be better for them to get the letter at the beginning of the match cycle next year, or should they insist on getting the LOR now and ask for some sort of, guarantee about next year if they decide to do that?
Yeah, so every attending has their own policy about how and when the letter is written. If you're rotating now, but you're not going to be applying for a year or two, there are some attendings who might write the letter right now and then just hold it, until when you need it. But there's some others who might want to write it closer to when you apply. They know that you will have additional things to communicate that to them about. You're not going to be the same applicant 1 or 2 years from now as you are today. So there may be things that you want that attending to include in that letter if they write it closer to the time of your application submission. What I would say to you is, if they want to write it closer to the time of the application submission, say a year or two from now, is make sure that you have a record of all the things that you did during that rotation. Because what you're trying to do is I view writing letters as a partnership. You have a lot of things in your mind about what you've done, right? The ways you've gone above and beyond for your patients, the qualities you've demonstrated, the skills, so on and so forth. And the attending has some picture in their mind. you're trying to put both of those things together to get the most effective letter written on your behalf. And so as the months go by, sometimes those memories start to fade a little bit. And so your memories, to make sure your memories don't fade, you want to write down as much as possible about the things that you did in that rotation. So if you really shined with one particular patient and your attending made note of that, you want to write a detailed account of that, because that's something you can bring to your attending's attention again 1 year from now when he or she sits down to write the letter. If you gave a great talk, it's important to make sure that you keep that PowerPoint presentation or that handout that you used, and maybe include that in the documents you give to the attending when they sit down to write the letter. So I want you all to be thinking of that type of approach, because I think attendings are very, very receptive to receiving help from you that would allow them to write the letter that you deserve. Rajni, anything to add to that? Alyssa, I would say that maybe we have time for a question or two before we wrap up.
Yeah, so I think maybe we can just choose 2 questions. I'll choose one from the chat, and I'll choose one from the Google Forms question that we can answer. So the next question that we had was, what are the aspects in an applicant that program directors look for or into?
So that really depends on the program and the program director. So the way in which a program selects their residents, it's internally built. So a lot of programs, because they've been analyzing resident performance for years and years, they've gained some insight into what are the factors that lead to success within their program. And so if they've defined certain qualities or traits or skills that they feel are predictive of success, they may be looking for those things in the application and certainly when you interview with them. So this goes back to what Dr. Kata was saying about doing your high-level research of each residency program, trying to determine what it is that they're trying to do. What is their mission? What are their goals? And if you can understand that, you can tailor your application or your interview performance to that. And so that's part of what your research is involved, is to get that type of information. And you can learn that again from the website, and as Dr. Kata said, not just the website, but looking at other sources of information. And if you can, talking to somebody that has some insight into that particular program, somebody who spent time there, whether it's current resident, former resident, doctor in the community that has ties to that particular hospital. Any one of a number of people can give you insight into a program and what they might be looking for. And then you can use that information to really build compelling answers that will show fit with that program.
I'll just add that in the Successful Matchbook, we also have the results of survey studies of residency program directors in different specialties about the qualities that are valued by that specialty. So you can also use that to review. For example, radiology might not recognize that communication skills are highly valued by program directors, but there's a lot of information in there in our book.
Yeah, so just so you all know, there is over 150 pages of detailed interview prep in the Successful Matchbook. A lot of details there, a lot of recommendations that are based on evidence in the field. Wherever there is evidence, we, Dr. Kata and I, have put it together there so that you can feel confident that what we're recommending is based on best practices. And there's a lot of insight from program directors in those chapters, deans, that go beyond just the general advice that you'll often see. In addition, please also be aware that on our website, thesuccessfulmatch.com, we have an extensive blog which has many, many posts on the residency interview. Again, very, very specific and strategic advice, that not the run-of-the-mill things that you will see, and it will give you significant edge in your interview prep and performance if you can read those. And those are complements to what's in the Successful Match book. Obviously, we can do posts on the blog faster than we can update the book, but they're complementary resources. Reggie, do you want to comment on a few other things that we have in terms of interview prep?
Sure, and Alyssa has included a number of our very helpful posts in the chat. So you have access to all of those in the chat, especially the one that thank you, Alyssa, the one that I was discussing about what questions do you have for me? I think that's a golden question to really prepare for. So you can see our approach to that question in the chat, in the link in the chat. I will mention also about the virtual interview. So I highly recommend that you read the posts that we have about how to prepare for your virtual interview and how to ace your virtual interview. And I split that up into two different posts because they do encompass slightly different areas. So in terms of preparing for your virtual interview, we're talking about the basics such as your lighting, your chair, how to ensure that there are no distractions, how to ensure that you have good enough connectivity, because that's crucial to having a good virtual interview. And then in terms of acing your virtual interview, we are talking in that post about how to ensure that you're making good eye contact, how to ensure that your virtual first impression is a good one. So I really recommend that you go ahead and look at those posts. They go into far more detail.
And just as a last note, having a comfortable chair is an insanely important thing. Just as I'm sitting here, I have my old college desk chair. So if you are in an interview, definitely make sure you have a comfortable chair. So just as a last send off from me.
Alyssa, that must be some chair you kept it along. It's got to be the best chair ever.
It's definitely seen some days. I bought it with my college kid money, so I'm sure it's made out of ramen noodles, actually. So
awesome.
Okay, so we'll do one last question from the chat, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. But the last question from the chat is, if we're going to submit for a second specialty, how can we address this issue in our personal statements, considering it's obvious from our LORs?
So if you're applying to more than one specialty, you are going to write a specialty specific statement. So you're going to have multiple statements, and you can, assign the specialty specific statement to those programs within that specialty, and then the other one to the other programs in the other specialty. So, and then the LORs, hopefully you have LORs that are from both specialties. Again, specialty specific LORs. Now, you don't necessarily, in most cases, you don't necessarily have to have all of your letters from doctors within that specialty. But it would be nice that if you're using a doctor's letter from another specialty, that they actually wrote in that letter that you are actually applying to the other specialty. So in other words, if you have done a surgery rotation and an internal medicine rotation, and you are using a surgery attending's letter for internal medicine, I would recommend, if possible, that you have the surgery attending indicate in the letter that this letter is for this applicant who's applying for internal medicine residency, rather than just saying, I'm supporting this applicant who's applying to your residency program.
And I realized I did not address one thing that I did want to mention, which is that we have some really good resources for the CASPER exam. So if this is not interview prep necessarily, but certain residency programs are requiring that applicants take the CASPER exam. And so if you go to our blog, which is at thesuccessfulmatch.com, you'll be able to find in our blog we have a 6-part series to help you prepare for the CASPER exam. And the CASPER is, it doesn't require extensive prep, but spending just a few hours to prepare for the exam will be very helpful.
So I will go ahead and close us off. I just wanted to say thank you to all those who joined us tonight and to those who submitted using our Google form. We hope that the webinar tonight has been useful for you and that we were able to address a lot of your questions and concerns. I did want to briefly reiterate that we encourage and welcome you guys to reach out to us if you have any specific, complicated questions. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We would be happy to answer your questions and, hear what you have to say. Especially if you have questions that you'd like to discuss privately, please feel free to reach out to any of us on our team. We're here to support you on your journey in medicine, and we're always happy to talk to you about anything that, you may want to talk about, even if it's just a talk and you're stressed out. So, feel free to reach out to us. As a reminder, we're going to be sending out a recording of this webinar later, after probably tomorrow or the day after. So keep an eye out for that. So with that, I'll just say thank you once again for joining us and for spending your night with us. And I will go ahead and pass it off to you, Dr. Desai, to go ahead with some final remarks.
Thank you, Alyssa. And I want to echo everything that Alyssa said. Here at MD2B Connect, we are here for you throughout this process. This is not just about doing a rotation. We want to support you all the way through. And that means making sure that we provide you with the resources that you need to become a more informed and effective interviewee. As you can tell, there's a lot of resources that we have developed. And so we encourage you to make use of that, everything from the Successful Match book and its 150 plus pages of interview prep to our blog. And we also have a podcast called Success in Medicine that you can access on our website, thesuccessfulmatch.com, with a lot of content with both of these for interview prep. And if there are some questions that we didn't cover today, or as Alyssa said, you have some specific situation that you just want to, talk to me about, you all have my direct line, so you can always reach out to me. For those new rotators that are out there, you may not have my direct line yet, but rest assured you'll be hearing from me very soon, so you will have my direct line. And remember, we never want you to feel like you're on an island in this journey. We are here to support you every step of the way, and we are rooting for your success. Reggie, any final words, Reggie?
All the best to you all. You got this.
Absolutely. You guys are great. We believe in you, and we can't wait to see you and hear about your successes. Let us know when you get an interview. We are absolutely thrilled to hear that news. So drop us a line.
Yeah, definitely share that with us. We're always excited to hear that. So thank you all for joining us and for your time. And with that, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week.
Here, bye.
Bye, guys.